Albert Morrison had been living on London streets for 30 years. This Vietnam veteran couldn't tell his war stories to anyone until he met Princess Diana in 1994. That night, Diana discovered that Albert wasn't just a homeless man. He was a hero who had fought for his country but was abandoned when he returned home. What Albert told Diana was so powerful that she called an emergency meeting at the palace the next day. This encounter completely changed Diana's life. What was Albert's secret? Why was Diana so deeply affected? It was December 8th, 1994, and London was experiencing one of its harshest winter nights in years. The temperature had dropped to -5 degrees Celsius, and a bitter wind cut through the empty streets like a knife. Most people were safely tucked away in their warm homes, but Princess Diana couldn't sleep. She had spent the evening at a charity dinner for homeless families, listening to statistics about how many people were living on London streets. The numbers were staggering, but Diana felt disconnected from the reality behind those figures. She needed to see for herself what homelessness really looked like. Against the advice of her security team, Diana slipped out of Kensington Palace at 11:30 p.m., wearing simple jeans, boots, and a heavy coat. She told her protection officers she was going for a late-night drive, but instead, she parked her car near Victoria Station and began walking through the areas where London's homeless population was known to gather. The sight that greeted her was more heartbreaking than anything she had imagined. People huddled in doorways, wrapped in cardboard and thin blankets, trying to shelter from the freezing wind. Some were young, barely out of their teens. Others were elderly, their faces weathered by years of living rough. But it was the figure sitting alone on a bench near the station entrance that caught Diana's attention. Albert Morrison was 67 years old, but he looked much older. His gray hair was long and unkempt, his beard streaked with silver. He wore multiple layers of clothing, all of them worn and dirty, and his hands were wrapped in strips of cloth to protect them from the cold. What struck Diana most was the way Albert sat. Unlike the other homeless people she had seen, who seemed defeated or resigned, Albert sat with military precision. His back was straight, his shoulders squared, and despite his circumstances, there was something dignified about his posture. Diana approached him slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you all right? It's such a cold night." Albert looked up, and Diana found herself staring into the most haunted eyes she had ever seen. They were pale blue and intelligent, but filled with a sadness that seemed to go deeper than mere homelessness. "I'm fine, miss," Albert replied, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Just another night like any other." There was something in his accent that Diana couldn't quite place. It was London, but refined, educated. This wasn't someone who had grown up on the street. "Would you mind if I sat with you for a moment?" Diana asked. Albert studied her face in the dim streetlight. If he recognized her, he didn't show it. "Suit yourself," he said, moving over to make room on the bench. "Though I should warn you, I'm not the best company these days." Diana sat down beside him, pulling her coat tighter against the cold. "I'm Diana," she said simply. "Albert Morrison," he replied. "Sergeant Albert Morrison, actually. Old habits die hard." The military title explained his posture, but it raised new questions. "You served in the army?" Diana asked. Albert let out a bitter laugh. "Vietnam, 1968 to 1970. 2nd Battalion, Light Infantry. Seems like a lifetime ago now." Diana felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Here was a man who had served his country, and now he was living on the street. "What happened when you came back?" Albert was quiet for a long time, staring out at the empty street. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Nobody wanted to hear what happened over there, miss. People just wanted us to come home and pretend everything was normal. But you can't pretend when you've seen the things we saw." But this was only the beginning of Albert's story, and what he would reveal next would change everything Diana thought she knew about how her country treated its heroes. "I tried to adjust," Albert continued. "Got a job at a factory, rented a small flat, but the nightmares wouldn't stop. The sounds, the smells, the faces of the men who didn't make it home, I started drinking to make it all go away. Diana listened in silence, understanding that this was probably the first time in years that Albert had found someone willing to hear his story. Lost the job first, Albert said. Then the flat. My wife couldn't handle what I'd become. Can't say I blame her. I wasn't the same man who'd left for Vietnam. That man died over there, and what came back was just a shell wearing his face. Albert pulled a worn photograph from his jacket pocket. Even in the dim light, Diana could see it showed a young soldier in uniform, smiling at the camera. He looked confident, hopeful, ready to serve his country with pride. That was me at 19, Albert said. Thought I was going to be a hero, thought I was going to make my family proud. What happened over there? Diana asked gently. Albert's hands began to shake, and not from the cold. We were sent to secure a village called Ben Tre. Intelligence said it was being used as a Viet Cong base, but when we got there, his voice trailed off. Diana waited patiently, sensing that Albert was struggling with memories he had kept buried for decades. It wasn't a military base, Albert finally said. It was just a village. Families, children, old people, but our orders were to clear it out. Some of the boys, they got carried away. Things happened that shouldn't have happened. Albert's voice broke, and Diana could see tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. I tried to stop it, he whispered. I really tried. Managed to save a few people, got them out before it got worse. But I couldn't save them all. The screaming, miss. I still hear the screaming every night. Diana felt her own eyes filling with tears. She was beginning to understand the weight that Albert had been carrying alone for over 25 years. There was this little girl, Albert continued. Couldn't have been more than 8 years old. She was hiding in a storage hut with her baby brother. I found them just as one of our boys was I stopped him, got the children out, carried them to the edge of the village where some of the survivors were gathering. Albert showed Diana another photograph, this one more worn than the first. It showed him in military fatigues, holding 2 small Vietnamese children. The little girl had her arms wrapped around his neck, and the baby was sleeping peacefully in his arms. That was the last decent thing I did in Vietnam, Albert said. Those children made it out alive because of me, but dozens of others didn't, and I couldn't stop what happened to them. Diana was struggling to process what she was hearing. This man sitting beside her had witnessed atrocities committed by his own unit, and had risked his life to save innocent civilians. Yet he was living on the streets, while the government he had served seemed to have forgotten he existed. Did you report what happened? Diana asked. Albert laughed bitterly. Report what? That some of Her Majesty's finest soldiers committed war crimes? That wouldn't have gone over well with the brass. I tried talking to my commanding officer, but he made it clear that what happened in Ben Tre was to stay in Ben Tre. So you kept quiet? For a while. But when I got back to England, I couldn't live with the silence. I went to the Ministry of Defense, tried to tell them what had really happened. They said they'd investigate, but nothing ever came of it. Instead, I started getting visits from people who suggested it would be better for everyone if I forgot about Vietnam entirely. Diana felt a chill of recognition. She knew how powerful people operated when they wanted to suppress uncomfortable truths. They threatened you? Not directly, Albert said. But I lost my job soon after I went to the mod, found it impossible to get another one. References went bad, applications got lost. It was like I'd been blacklisted. Albert explained how his life had gradually fallen apart. Without work, he couldn't pay rent. Without a permanent address, he couldn't get work. The drinking had gotten worse as his situation deteriorated, and his wife had finally left him. Been on the streets for 30 years now, Albert concluded. Tried the homeless shelters, but they're overcrowded and dangerous. Safer out here, even in weather like this. Diana was quiet for several minutes, absorbing everything Albert had told her. Here was a man who had served his country with honor, who had saved innocent lives at great personal risk, and who had been abandoned by the very system he had tried to serve. Albert, she said finally, I want to help you, but more than that, I want to help other veterans who might be in similar situations. Albert looked at her more closely for the first time, studying her face in the streetlight. You're not just some concerned citizen, are you? Diana hesitated for a moment, then decided on honesty. I'm Princess Diana. Albert's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't seem particularly surprised. Thought there was something familiar about you, he said. Seen you on the telly, visiting hospitals and such. Does it matter that I'm royal? Albert shrugged. Not to me. You're the first person in 30 years who sat down and actually listened to my story. That matters more than any title. Diana felt a surge of determination unlike anything she had experienced before. Albert, I promise you this, your story will be heard. What happened to you? What's still happening to veterans like you? It's not right, and I'm going to do something about it. With respect, Your Highness, Albert said, I've heard promises before. Politicians, charity workers, social services, they all say they want to help, but nothing ever changes. I'm not a politician, Diana replied firmly. And I don't make promises I can't keep. Will you trust me? Albert studied her face again, looking for any sign of the empty sympathy he had encountered so many times before. Instead, he saw something that surprised him, genuine anger on his behalf. What do you want me to do? He asked. First, I want to get you somewhere warm and safe tonight, Diana said. Then I want you to help me understand how many other veterans are living on the street. And I want your permission to tell your story to people who can make a difference. Over the next 2 hours, Diana and Albert sat on that cold bench while Albert told her more about his experiences. He introduced her to other veterans he knew who were living rough, each with their own story of service and abandonment. Diana met Robert Chen, a former Royal Navy sailor who had been homeless for 15 years after developing PTSD following a deployment in the Falklands. She spoke with David Williams, an Army medic who had saved dozens of lives in Northern Ireland, but had been living in doorways for 8 years after his service-related injuries made it impossible for him to work. Each story was different in its details, but they all shared common themes. Men who had served their country with honor, who had developed mental health issues or physical disabilities as a result of their service, and who had been failed by the very systems that were supposed to support them. The experience transformed Diana's understanding of both homelessness and military service. These weren't lazy people looking for handouts. They were forgotten heroes who had sacrificed their health and well-being for their country. As dawn began to break over London, Diana made a decision that would define the next phase of her charitable work. She was going to create a comprehensive support system for homeless veterans, and she was going to start with Albert. Albert, she said as she prepared to leave, I want you to come with me. I'm going to arrange for you to have proper accommodation, medical care, and support. But more than that, I want you to help me set up a program to help other veterans. Albert looked skeptical. I appreciate the offer, Your Highness, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for that kind of work. I'm just a broken-down old soldier. You're a man who saved children's lives in Vietnam and has survived 30 years on London streets, Diana replied. You're exactly the right person for this work. 3 days later, Diana called an emergency meeting at Kensington Palace. Helen Whitmore, her private secretary, had arranged for key figures in Veterans Affairs and Homelessness Services to attend. Patricia Reynolds, a leading expert in veterans' mental health, was shocked when Diana presented her with Albert's story and the testimonies of the other homeless veterans she had met. Your Royal Highness, Dr. Reynolds said, what you're describing suggests that we have a hidden epidemic of homeless veterans in this country. The official numbers don't reflect anything close to what you've encountered. Diana had suspected as much. That's because these men have become invisible. They're not using official services, they're not registered anywhere, they've essentially disappeared from the system. Commander James Tucker, Albert's former commanding officer who had been located and invited to the meeting, was visibly shaken when he learned about Albert's circumstance. Sergeant Morrison was one of the finest soldiers I ever served with, Commander Tucker revealed. What he did in Vietnam, saving those children, that took incredible courage. I had no idea he was living on the street. Diana used this meeting to announce her intention to establish the Veterans Dignity Project, a comprehensive program designed to identify, support, and rehabilitate homeless veterans across the United Kingdom. The program would provide immediate accommodation, medical and mental health support, job training, and long-term housing solutions. But most importantly, it would treat veterans with the respect and dignity they deserved after their service to the country. Albert became the program's first success story and eventually its chief advocate. With Diana's support, he received treatment for his PTSD, was housed in a comfortable flat, and began working to identify and help other homeless veterans. Michael O'Connor, who ran a homeless shelter in East London, became a key partner in the program after Diana visited his facility and saw firsthand how many of his clients were veterans. Princess Diana didn't just create another charity, Michael later explained. She created a movement that fundamentally changed how we think about veterans and homelessness. Thomas Hartley, who headed the largest existing veterans charity, initially resisted Diana's new approach. But when Diana brought him face to face with Albert and other homeless veterans, his perspective changed dramatically. I realized that we had been failing an entire generation of veterans, Thomas admitted. Princess Diana showed us that good intentions weren't enough. We needed to completely rethink our approach. The Veterans Dignity Project grew rapidly, with Diana insisting that it maintain a personal touch. She continued to meet with individual veterans, learning their stories and ensuring that each person received individualized support. Albert became the unofficial leader of the program's peer support network, using his natural leadership abilities and hard-earned wisdom to guide other veterans through their recovery journeys. The program also had an advocacy component, with Diana using her public platform to draw attention to issues affecting veterans. She spoke in Parliament, gave interviews to major newspapers, and used her royal engagements to highlight veterans' needs. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Diana's veterans' work was how it changed her own perspective on royal duty. Her encounter with Albert had shown her that real impact came from genuine relationships and sustained commitment, not just ceremonial appearances. The success of the Veterans Dignity Project attracted international attention, with delegations from other countries visiting London to study Diana's methods. The program became a model for veteran support services worldwide. Albert lived to see the program help over 3,000 homeless veterans find stable housing and support. At a celebration marking the program's success, he gave a speech that brought tears to everyone present. Years ago, I was a forgotten man living on London streets, Albert said. I thought nobody cared about old soldiers like me, but Princess Diana proved me wrong. She didn't just give me a home, she gave me back my dignity. And through this program, she's given dignity back to thousands of veterans who thought they were forgotten forever. Albert passed away peacefully in 2005 in his own bed in a comfortable flat provided by the Veterans Dignity Project. At his funeral, Diana delivered a eulogy that captured the essence of what her friendship with Albert had meant. Albert Morrison taught me that heroism isn't just about brave acts on the battlefield, Diana said. It's about maintaining your humanity in the face of unimaginable experiences. It's about surviving when survival seems impossible. And it's about finding the strength to help others even when you feel broken yourself. Diana's work with homeless veterans continued until her death in 1997, and the Veterans Dignity Project remains active today as a lasting testament to the chance encounter between a princess and a forgotten soldier on a cold December night. Albert Morrison's story had indeed changed royal history, not through grand gestures or political maneuvering, but through the simple act of one person listening to another's pain and deciding to do something about it. The homeless veteran who had been invisible for 30 years had found his voice through Princess Diana, and together they had created a legacy of compassion and service that continues to help forgotten heroes find their way home. In the end, Albert's greatest victory wasn't surviving Vietnam or 30 years on the streets. It was proving that even the most broken person could be healed with the right support, and that everyone, no matter how forgotten, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect.